the estimate was 150,000 that were killed. So the estimates, I would think, are closer to 500,000. You know, the amount of people that were killed from April 2023
To now.
until now, because you have areas where there's nobody counting how many people have been killed.
Because I've heard some people say that this might probably be knocking at the millions of people who've been killed. Is that a possibility?
That's a possibility. That's always a possibility.
Man. Anyway, but look, so if 17 million have been displaced, what's the approximate population of Sudan?
Sudan, before the war, it was in the 40 million.
So that's almost half of the country has been displaced.
Yes.
Now, why do you think people don't talk about this war more than, Palestine and Ukraine, now Iran? Like, I feel like, and this is everybody, including us black people. Why do we prioritize other people's problems more than our own problems? Yes, peace and blessings, everybody. I am your brother Orina, all the way from the motherland, all the way from Kenya, Nairobi, nation's capital. Welcome to Sell Africa to Africans, the home of Pan-Africanism. Well, welcome to another edition of updates on the Sudan war, the world's worst humanitarian crisis. You know I really care about Sudan. I've had a lot of Sudanese activists and journalists and researchers on the show. And today, it's a part 2 of the previous episode we had with our brother Mosaab Baba. I mean, I saw all of your feedback. I've summarized them. And today we are going to answer all of your questions. I know the last one was extremely detailed. Well, today we're going to answer all your questions, and we're going to add a little bit more on the updates on the Sudan war so far. And a lot of things have been happening, a lot of developments, not only in Sudan, but around Sudan. So we'll touch it. Today we have you covered. And if you have questions, please put them at the comments. And Mosaab will answer them in the next episode, because we'll be doing this. We'll be doing this very, very often, because this is a very, very, very serious topic. Well, guys, please welcome the one and only Mosaab Baba. Mosaab, how you doing?
Thank you, Brother Arena. Thank you for having me again.
Right now you're a friend of the show.
Always happy to do it, brother.
Bro, the last episode was explosive, especially the clips. I think people have never ever gotten a clear explanation of how the war started, especially the presentation, the screen presentation you did. I think people have never seen that perspective. Mm-hmm. And that really, really opened people's minds. And now the people who watch the video, which is tens of thousands of people, really, really learned something new. Actually learned a lot of things. Well, one thing that I've always wanted to ask you is before we go to the updates, is the impact of the war. See, when you Google now, hundreds of thousands of people have died and millions have been displaced. But those hundreds of thousands, we don't know the exact amount. Some people are saying it's even in the millions of people that have died. Why do you think we don't have the exact number of people who have been reported dead and displaced? Why is there no exact number? Yeah.
Well, thank you again, Arena. The reason you're not seeing any specific numbers, casualties, displacement, destruction, all of these metrics and all of these indicators, they require a very minimum level of either the state to be operating or civil society on the ground to be operating and tracking these things from one area to the next. The level of chaos in Sudan since the war started has pretty much made the state unavailable, and also like whether their civil society or the legal system has also collapsed. You know, the judiciary, you know, the police force, all of these things, because of how intense the war was. You know, when the war started and you're in Khartoum, if you were in Khartoum at that time, it was just absolute chaos. You had RSF everywhere, you had SAF trying to attack and everything. So most of the class that actually, you know, care and work on, the census or counting the actual fatalities and, you know, where are you registering them? The ministries and the hospitals were pretty much, you know, rendered ineffective, destroyed or abandoned or something like that. So all the central institutions that will usually do the count of fatalities and stuff like that. I mean, we've had so many makeshift mass graves. People are coming back to Khartoum. They you know, during the war, when it was in Khartoum, you had people who had to bury their families in the yard of their house because they couldn't go out to the cemeteries and bury them because of the RSF and how much it was causing chaos in Khartoum. There's been almost 15,000 bodies recovered in just the past year of people like that you don't even know them. But there's a bigger problem in Sudan, even before the war. You know, I remember there was a neighborhood in Khartoum where people were complaining that there's a very bad smell coming from a hospital it's close to a residential area. So when they went, they found that there's a container, like a regular shipping container, filled with bodies. So the neighborhood was like, what is this? What's going on? When people started asking around, they found out that this was in 2021. They found out that some of the bodies were there since 2019. Since the attack on the sit-in in front of the military headquarters during the December Revolution, that a lot of the people who were killed in that attack, they were just brought to the hospital and dumped in these containers.
That was by Bashir, yeah?
Yeah, Bashir, but then also Burhan and Hamid. You know, at that time, like when the attack happened, Bashir was already removed. You know, he's been removed for almost 2 months.
Oh, so that was after.
This was Burhan and Hamid, these forces, completely. So then we started finding out that there's protesters that were killed and also put in this container.
Damn.
And there had to be a whole team was formed to actually start doing autopsies to find out who these people are. And sure enough, some of them were recognized as being protesters that were killed and then shoved into these containers. So there's already a problem. Like the last episode when I talked about like the Bashir regime and how destructive it was, that corruption and that level of fascism from the Bashir regime, it pretty much went into all the institutions of the state, you know, including the judiciary, including the public prosecutor, including the police force, including the army, including the RSF. Like you have to look at the entire structure of the Bashir regime. If they are willing to ethnically cleanse people in Darfur and kill 300,000 people. And in South Sudan, killing almost 2 million people and ending with the country being separated.
Yeah.
The amount of repression that would be in situations like this is insane. So even before the war, even before Bashir was removed, like the idea of having proper statistics, and it's almost like that's a very advanced stage of being able to run a country. The deformity that happened to the state, to Sudan as a state, as a result of that 30-year, this is where it comes up. Where now you don't have, of course, with the war, then like not having statistics and stuff like that, it's just because of the level of carnage that happened in Sudan. But I'm just trying to say that there's more underlying problems even before the carnage of the war happened, the most recent war. So there's corruption right now. There's, accusations of corruption in the humanitarian aid.
NGOs, huh?
And local NGOs that are set up by like Burhan's government and stuff like that are looking at humanitarian aid coming in as a source of income. And with the corruption and everything going on the ground, so it also makes you think of a level of corruption that seeped even after the war. You would think that after the war, there would kind of be a reset, and that since, you're fighting and it's call it the war of dignity, since it's the war of dignity, you would think that corruption in humanitarian aid, at the very least, should be curtailed. But I'm saying these things just to give indicators of how bad the situation is and why not having just a statistics of how many people have been killed since 2023 until now it speaks to a bigger institutional problem within the formation of the state itself. And then with the war, it just completely destroyed everything as far as, being able to be a functioning state and having the very least of like how many of your citizens have been killed.
There's no system.
There's no system. And now now we're talking in the SAF areas, let alone the RSF areas. And the RSF areas, of course, like having actual institutions and that are doing that is just, way outside of, their focus, and for the nature of the RSF itself. So the estimates are anywhere from, we started hearing numbers like 60,000. I'm like, that's not right.
Yeah.
And then they did some, there was a study that was done in Khartoum state after SAF retook Khartoum. And they were saying that, 15,000 bodies just and then the estimate was 150,000 that were killed. So the estimates I would think are closer to 500,000. The amount of people that were killed from April 2023
to now
until now. Because you have areas where there's nobody counting how many people have been killed. Blue Nile. You have areas in South Kordofan. You have areas in Darfur under the RSF. So there's no institutions and there's no even interest actually for doing a full statistical count of how many people have died.
Well, what about the ones, sorry.
And the displacement also. The displacement, the standard number that was kind of agreed on, but only agreed on because it was UN agencies that were doing the counting and the estimations.
Yeah.
But recently we started seeing estimations as high as 17 million displaced. That's internally and people who left the country as refugees.
And so, of course, they leave it to go to Chad. Are they going to other neighboring countries as refugees?
Yes.
Chad is one of them.
Egypt,
Chad,
and South Sudan have the biggest numbers.
Now look. What about the ones who are saying that? Because I've heard some people say that this might probably be knocking at the millions of people who've been killed. Is that a possibility?
That's a possibility. That's always a possibility.
Man. Anyway, but look, so if 17 million have been displaced, what's the approximate population of Sudan?
Sudan, before the war, it was in the 40 million.
So that's almost half of the country has been displaced.
Yes.
Now, why do you think people don't talk about this war more than, Palestine and Ukraine and now Iran? I feel like, and this is everybody, including us Black people. Why do we prioritize other people's problems more than our own problems? Because if you look at the activism realm, it's leaning more on Palestine and Ukraine and now Iran and everybody apart from Black people. Why do you think? Because 17 million displaced, you would think that this would be the top item in the various activism campaigns. Why do you think that's the case?
So at face value, when you just look at it to the naked eye, people outside of Africa are looking at these as civil wars within Africa. Even you have a lot of Sudanese who say, yeah, it's a civil war, you know, between the SAF and between the RSF and the communities that make up the core of their support.
Yeah.
Which is not wrong either. But when you compare it, to example, to Palestine, it's a settler colonial war, meaning that there's a clear outside enemy that came in to the Palestinian land, took it over, and has been oppressing these people ever since. So you could say that it's because it's the most clear manifestation of colonialism and imperialism. So it's very clear as far as where people are standing on that conflict. Sudan, people get confused because if you go online right now, you're going to see the most arguments are happening between Sudanese. You have a couple of factions. You have people who are supporting the army. And that number, you can argue, is the largest number as far as numbers of people that for them, before getting into politics and before getting into anything complicated, to them, SAF needs to protect us from the RSF. That's as far as a lot of them are thinking about it. And there's no other way. You can explain it, you can break it down, you can do all these things. But for people living in those areas, they're like, yeah, that's fine. All of your political breakdown and everything is cool. But we need people to protect us from the RSF. I argue that this is by design. You know, the people
By
behind
design.
SAF, the people that have been pushing SAF and coercing SAF, the NCP that we talked about last time, Bashir's party, they knew what they were doing when they started the war with the RSF. And the RSF knew what it was doing because now you have these forces that are separating the country. But before that, when you go, look, and going back to the rhetoric, actually online. So if you go, you're going to see Sudanese that support SAF.
Yeah. Well,
You're
before you
gonna
go to
see-
the next one, wait, just before you go to the next one, on that point, somebody told me, he said, you know what, the reason why we are doing this, we are supporting SAF, is because, like, fine, SAF is imperfect, right? But the reason why we're supporting is because there's no other army,
There's no option.
there's no option.
Yeah.
There's no other army that can fight for the country. So we are just rallying on SAF so that they can take back the country. It's the same thing with Kenya. Like, let's say Trump comes and kidnaps Ruto the way he did Maduro, right? Majority of Kenyans hate Ruto, including me.
But they would stand with him.
But they would stand with not Ruto, they'll stand with the presidency, not the president.
The sovereignty of the country.
Yes, the sovereignty and the presidency of the country.
Yeah.
Because you took our president, what will stop you from picking the other subsequent presidents, that are about to come? So I see that point. I see why people are rallying behind the SAF because they're just looking at the sovereignty of the country. And I think people have no option on how they can take their country back.
Yep.
What do you think?
That's also why, like, I wouldn't put blame on these people or say that, hey, you're supposed to have political awareness to make you understand that, somebody who's in an area that's at risk of being attacked by the RSF, they're not trying to hear all that. They're trying to hear, how will we be protected?
Yeah.
Again, it goes back from that level to the level of now when you're talking about the sovereignty of the country and about the state and the RSF being a non-state actor trying to overthrow the government and destroy the state institutions and apparatus and stuff like that, which is also a legitimate point. But the RSF has been part of the government for the past 20 years, since they were formed officially in 2013.
Okay.
So we're talking about for 13 years, this is a force that's been not only part of the government, but it's been the ground force of SAF. So once you start looking at kind of taking a step back, and granted, taking a step back and looking at it that way, it requires a certain level of luxuries that people inside of Sudan don't have.
Mm-hmm.
People who are facing this threat on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so the idea of the sovereignty of the country,
Mm-hmm.
the number one threat to a country's sovereignty is destabilization. Destabilization can take a lot of forms. You know, we see it right now in the Sahel, for example. All of a sudden, the rhetoric coming from France and from a lot of these NGOs and stuff is that, you know, the military junta is killing these, you know, poor JNIM, you know, and Azwad people, you know what I mean? Like the framing of it after you have a Al-Qaeda affiliated group coming in. In Sudan, we don't have something like the JNIM or Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam wal-Muslimin, which is basically the Al-Qaeda affiliate over there.
Yeah.
ISWAP, which is pretty much the ISIS affiliate over there, ravaging multiple countries at the same time. Our instability is coming from within. The call is coming from within the house.
Okay.
You know, if this war happened all of a sudden, the RSF all of a sudden decided that they're going to rebel against Burhan, and Burhan was caught in a kind of defensive mode of just, you know, defending the country, then we could have said that, yeah, you know, the RSF is clearly the, you know, the outside agitator. You probably hear this sometimes also. People say that the RSF is an invading army, that they're not Sudanese, that they come from outside of Sudan.
I've heard that before.
The overwhelming majority of the RSF right now are Sudanese, like from Darfur and from Kordofan.
Are there some that are coming from outside?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Of course.
Okay.
There's been like recruitment and stuff coming from outside, but we'll talk about the Ethiopia thing. But just like the Ethiopia thing, an aspect was kind of blown out of proportion.
Okay.
You know what I mean? For the narrative.
So number one, we were people who are supporting the army. So what's number two?
And then you have a minority of people that are actively supporting the RSF. The RSF support, there's an active support and there's a passive support.
Okay.
The active support are people who actually buy the idea that, you know, RSF is going to, last episode, like when we went into the history of the NCP and everything, it goes back decades. So some of the politicians within the RSF are saying, no, we want to end this historic oppression by Bashir's groups and bring in a new Sudan, you know. And of course, it's very insane to actually think that the RSF is actually fighting to bring democracy to Sudan, you know. But there's a passive support for the RSF, which are people who live under the RSF because the RSF makeup is from their communities. When you go to southern Darfur and you go to East Darfur, you go a lot of places in North Darfur and everything, these people actually they don't like the RSF as far as a governing body sitting over them. But because after the war started, there's been a rhetoric from the SAF supporters, the extreme ones that are also like more remnants of the Bashir era, basically saying that we need to get rid of these communities. They call them something called Arab al-Shatat, which means the Arabs of the expat Arabs, or the Arabs from the outside, or the Arabs that are coming from outside. And they're saying that we need to get rid of these communities. So if you're from these communities, even if you're not with the RSF and you don't like the RSF, that rhetoric put you in a place where that's genocide talk.
Yeah.
That's ethnic cleansing talk.
Yeah.
And then when you couple that with the fact that SAF really has been hitting some civilian areas, markets, a hospital, things like that, then the message is then clear to the people from this community that we're going to be ethnically cleansed if SAF ever gets the upper hand and is able to move back into Darfur and, along with its allies that are working with it and stuff like that, So that's support for the RSF. You won't see a lot of that. Like if you're online or anything online, when you're online, it's a very skewed kind of, version of reality. Now that's the second group. So you have the SAF support and why people support SAF. You have the RSF supporters and why there's a group of people that support the RSF. And then you have a third group of people. This is kind of growing in numbers as time go on. And there's even people both in the SAF camp and the RSF camp that agree with this simple premise that this war does not have any kind of military solution to it. Meaning that if SAF wants to get rid of the RSF, you're most likely looking at a war that's going to continue for decades and left in limbo. But to me, I don't agree with it because it's just like, just a peaceful stance or anything like that. My view goes a little bit into the regional actors within it. So the conventional wisdom was that Egypt has been kind of supporting and coercing pretty much SAF, since 2019. So we're going on 7 years now that it's been coercing it. And it's no secret that Egypt has been supporting SAF in this war. On the other hand, you have it, and it's undisputed that the UAE is funding the RSF and supporting it. So we have a war in Sudan that's been going on. Now we're in the 4th year of the war, where we have the main backers of the two sides of this war that have been financially supporting and militarily supporting it and politically and everything.
Okay.
2 days ago, Assisi went and visited Mohammed bin Zayed in the UAE to check up on the Egyptian Air Force that's stationed there to counter the Iran attacks. So now let's take a step back. We have two countries that are supporting different sides of the war in Sudan, but in reality, they have the same security policy when it comes to the Middle East.
When it comes to the US-Israel-Iran war.
Yeah.
Okay.
So now you have Egypt and the UAE taking the side of Israel in its attack on Iran. Right? So then the question becomes, is the war in Sudan and its support from these countries, is it a war that they're supporting these sides so that one of them overcomes the other and controls the country? Or is it a perpetual state of war for Sudan so that it's divided by these countries and divided between SAF and RSF? Because the ugly reality is that most of the resources that are going out of Sudan, whether they're agricultural resources, livestock, gold, all of these are going through Egypt and mostly, like where the gold example, ending up in the UAE.
Okay.
So we have to ask the question, is the war and the continuation of the war and the support for the war, is it to actually get rid of one of the is Egypt's support for SAF so that they can completely destroy the RSF and take it over? Or just keep two military governments that don't have a diplomatic policy, they don't have a trade policy, they don't have a security policy for the region, they don't have anything except being susceptible to these countries and their policies.
Mm-hmm.
You know, let's look at it in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when the December Revolution happened, the will of the Sudanese themselves became very clear. We don't want military rule.
Civilian rule.
We want to make use of our own resources. We need development. We don't want to be dragged into wars like in Yemen or in Libya or anything like that. We want a true democracy. We want to end the marginalization of these areas. So these were kind of principles that were declared within the December Revolution. And then you had from December 2018 until now, consistently, the discourse, the political discourse and the discourse of the nation that's been attacked has been this idea of a revolution from all around Sudan that came on the heels of 30 years of resistance from all parts of Sudan and all different factions of Sudan.
Mm-hmm.
So you had when it started, and then you had the sit-in in April through June 2019.
Mm-hmm.
SAF and RSF were the ones that went and killed over 200 people and dispersed that sit-in. And it was the biggest sit-in ever in, like, I would say in Africa, but
Wow.
you know, we had the South Africa anti-apartheid movement.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm pretty sure that there were bigger gatherings than that, but for such a consistent and a long time. But then other things started coming up. For example, one of the issues that came up in that period was normalization with Israel, the Abraham Accords. Both SAF and RSF and a few politicians were completely on board with that. Normalizing with Israel, you know, creating that, you know, condemning Hamas and condemning the Palestinian resistance and all of this stuff. Burhan, Hemeti, the politicians, a small group of the politicians that were there during the transitional period, but the overwhelming majority of the Sudanese public was either indifferent about it or opposed to it.
Okay.
But the opposition from the activists and a lot of the political bodies was very clear. And this, we're not talking about just leftist political parties or Islamist political parties. We're talking about, you know, an anti-imperialist, you know, understanding that's been with Sudanese for a very long time, with issues like the Palestinian issue. And standing it because, you know, when we look at Zionism, we're not just looking at its effect on Palestinians. You know, you've probably seen what's happening in the US right now. You know, for people my age, like, we never thought in a million years that we would see the issue of the Zionist state and how destructive it is and how destructive the Israeli lobby is and all of these things.
AIPAC.
At AIPAC, the IDF, how much Mossad is actually involved in coercing Western governments, the Epstein issue, like all of these things are things that are now on the surface that we never thought would be a conversation over there. So
also in Africa with Glencoe and in Congo. I mean, Zionism is affecting almost everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So these kind of things, once the refusal happened, and also other things that have to do with more the economic issue. So the issue of subsidies.
Yeah.
You know, the government, the transitional government was pressured so that they have to go with World Bank and IMF prescriptions. You know, lift subsidies from all of the products and let the free market just, you know, handle that. It's a classic capitalist, you know, neoliberal policy that's been imposed on a lot of countries. And a lot of countries have broken because of the, you know, not being able to pay the loans back, having to privatize. That was also something huge that in the Bashir era, they were trying to play ball with the IMF and the World Bank and everything. And they went through the prescriptions of privatizing lands industries. A lot of these things that used to be public domain in Sudan have been privatized and selling off a lot of the land in Africa. So there's also, you got the Western countries started looking at Sudan as a source of a problem because of the natural inclinations of the people. During the December Revolution, people were asking for free healthcare and free education. In the US, that's called communism. There's always been this thing, I don't like quoting Noam Chomsky after what came out, but what he said was actually right, where since the neoliberal era started in the early 80s, the entire political spectrum moved to the right. So issues like privatization and, World Bank and IMF prescriptions and, austerity measures and structural readjustments and all these code words that means moving countries from public services and having, making use of their resources and subsidizing the basic, products that people need, going towards the right, towards, the neoliberal kind of economic capitalist takeover of these countries. So this put an entire aspiration of a country in the target. That's when you put all these things together. You're refusing the Abraham Accords. You're refusing the IMF and World Bank prescriptions. You're refusing to be used as a mercenary army. As far as the people refusing the state to be a mercenary army sent to Yemen and all that kind of stuff. You're going against Western policies in the region that are manifested through countries like the UAE and countries like Egypt. Also, Egypt, throughout that transitional period, trying to get Sudanese to go against Ethiopians. So trying to pit Sudan against Ethiopia for a long time now. And Sudanese, naturally, for them, they're not looking at Ethiopians as enemies. This is something very new. That's why the propaganda of Ethiopia actually actively being in this war, actively supporting the RSF as a country is going to be extremely destructive going forward if a conflict breaks out between Ethiopia and between Sudan. We'll get into that later. But what I'm trying to say is that the natural aspirations of the Sudanese people have kind of been opposed to Western policy and their satellites in the region. So that's why in October 2021, Hemmetin Burhan overthrew the civilian government of the transitional period. And saying that basically we need to remove them because they couldn't agree. They gave a lot of bullshit reasons why they overthrew them.
What was the real reason?
The real reason was because the natural inclination, if they let a civilian government stay in Sudan, because the idea was that there was going to be 18 months of military rule and then 24 months of civilian rule. The civilian rule was clearly against, there's civilian politicians that are with the imperialist program. But the bulk of not only the civilians, but the streets behind them was against Western policies.
Yes.
Hemmetin and Burhan were used as a way to remove that element that's against, because for us in Sudan, Western policies, we don't have European countries coming into Sudan or the US coming into Sudan physically or anything. It's through their proxies, through the UAE and through Egypt. They have their red lines. Last time we talked about that Red Sea arena. The UAE and Egypt and these countries are almost given the green light to keep the region in check. So if any country has aspirations like the AES and what the AES is doing, shut that down. Burhan and Hemeti are the tools to shut down any Sudanese sovereign aspirations. Both of them, SAF and RSF. People don't like hearing that because it complicates the issue a little bit more. Because now the automatic question is, well, so who do we support? You know, for the citizens on the ground, they're like, that's a cool story, bro. But, you know, this is survival for us. This is now we're trying to think about the kind of macro picture of what's going on, the motivations, and the, you know, breakup of why is this war? To answer your question from the beginning, 17 million people being displaced.
Oh my.
And the amount of people that have been killed in the hundreds of thousands. And it's still not getting attention and anything because there's a lack of will to go into these deeper issues of why this war actually started. What motivated them on April 15th, 2023 to start this war? Because it didn't just start on April 2023. There was a buildup to it. You know, the coup that happened in 2021, after that, SAF and RSF started having their differences. Because it's like, okay, if you're saying the problem is with these civilians, now the civilians are out. So you should be able, SAF and RSF together, to run the country and to run its economy and address the security issues and address the economic issues and bring stability and start doing development and everything. If the AES can do it as a military government, then why can't you? But again, the issue is because these two, SAF and the RSF, the idea of them giving up power and being a national sovereign military that answers to a constitution and answers to a civilian government, to them,
it's out of a question.
Because they built their loyalties based on patronage. The RSF, when they recruit new factions, they're promising them a piece of the gold mining trade. They're promising them trade routes. They're promising them things like that. SAF, when they bring in groups and they want to persuade them to be part of the power structure, they're giving them a new ministry. They're giving them a piece of the gold trade in northern Sudan and eastern Sudan and these areas. You know, when we analyze the war, we keep forgetting that the structures of SAF and RSF for the past 30 years have been fascist structures, ultra right-wing structures that are meant to keep the Sudanese people in check. There's a lot of talk about how the makeup of the Sudanese army from the beginning, it was more of a colonial army than it was a liberation army. You know, when we had the wave of African liberation, you have most of the African countries had liberation movements that were military to actually kick out the colonial forces. The makeup of SAF, its precursor was a colonial army for the British. The Sudan Defense Forces was the British colonial army in Sudan. And then you can't have a army that's part of the British colonial army and then turn on a switch, and now all of a sudden it's a sovereign army as part of, you know, a sovereign independent Sudanese country. That's why the idea of the Sudanese army having a strong link with the Egyptian army that's never been quite severed since colonization is also something that people have written about and discussed. This is what makes the war so complicated, that once you start following the money and following the DNA of these forces that are actually in power, we find that the entire setup was a neo-colonial setup. So if you have your army that's a remnant of the British army, then what motivation do they have to liberate the land and defend the land? As opposed to the kind of function of a colonial army of keeping the natives in check. When you look at the history of Sudan from independence, the Sudanese army has not fought a single war with an enemy outside of Sudan.
Damn. That's crazy.
You've never seen a peacekeeping force from the African Union or anything bringing in Sudanese troops, ever. But the wars have been happening since independence. So these are difficult things to digest. You know, especially in a war situation, nobody really wants to hear, you know, an analysis that kind of, you know, gets them away from being able to support
a certain side.
SAF or, you know what I mean? Like stuff like that.
Yeah.
But the truth is the truth. And that's why there's the consensus. And earlier when we talked about the third group being the group that's saying that the war needs to stop and that we need to have a dialogue among all Sudanese, kind of like an establishment dialogue of establishing the state. Because of the deformities that have happened in the state since the colonial period, we now need to rethink the makeup of the state itself, the constitution of the state, the governance of the state, and the role of the military and the security sector in the state. So this is where things got complicated. And now there's a little bit of a stalemate in Nuba Mountains, but the real danger is here in Blue Nile.
Yeah.
So Blue Nile State, can't zoom that much, but Blue Nile State, along with the SPLM North, since the late 80s, they've controlled these areas of southern Blue Nile. This is Blue Nile State. Blue Nile State is bordering South Sudan on this side, and it's bordering Ethiopia on this side. But these areas in southern Blue Nile, this strip over here, is what the SPLM North has been controlling for decades right now. Also because it's one of the most marginalized areas in Sudan. But now, if you notice, this is a map of Sudan, and this is a map of South Sudan. South Sudan on this side, you don't see the coloring or like SAF or RSF or anything.
Yes.
But RSF moves all through these areas of South Sudan. Why? Does the South Sudan government, did they invite them in and tell them, come and make use of these areas? It's because the central government in Juba itself can't control these areas. And the border line is so huge and so long between Sudan and South Sudan. The RSF, we see these borders because it's a map and internationally it's recognized as these are the borders. But in reality, these groups are not looking at the borders. They're looking at areas where they can actually move around. What makes it more complicated is that there's been a huge faction of South Sudanese with the RSF.
Okay.
But they're mostly opposed to Salva Kiir. They're opposition to the government in Juba. So now Juba is caught in a place where it can either A, do a military mobilization to attack those forces that are with the RSF, which means getting into war with the RSF as well. And now this would open the door for all of the different factions in South Sudan to team up with the RSF and remove the government in Juba.
You think Riek Machar is behind it?
I don't think it's Riek Machar specifically, but there are definitely some breakaway factions from the Machar group that are moving with the RSF. Because this is something historic also. Historically, the Bashir regime has always been supporting the opposition to the SPLM, wherever it is. So in South Sudan, and there's also, unfortunately, there's an ethnic element to it, or tribal. Pretty much the ethnicity is the same, but the tribal element to it where the Denka are kind of the stronghold of the SPLM, and the Nuer have been like, in the SPLM, but in opposition to Kir and his group. So what Khartoum would do, they would support militias all around South Sudan that would fight Juba and would fight Salva Kiir. So there's a precedence to this. The RSF didn't get this out of nowhere. They recognize that there's a historic relationship between the Khartoum government and the rebellions against. This is even before South Sudan became its own country. When the SPLM was a rebel movement, they would support groups that would fight the SPLM.
Okay.
And then after the war, after the separation of South Sudan, it became Khartoum supporting the rebels because now South Sudan is an independent country. So then you have Khartoum supporting rebels that would fight the government in Juba. So when the war started, you had a lot of factions in South Sudan that were actually, that would, join the RSF just as a way, at the very least, just as a way of, gaining ground, gaining resources, opening new areas of gold trade and stuff like that. So when the RSF became an alliance with the SPLM North, now the RSF has this whole area to move in. And this is Upper Nile state in South Sudan. So you have Malakal down here, you have Rank and everything, but they're just not shown on the map. To the point where in 2020, the RSF were already controlling this area of Ulu in Blue Nile state. So once the alliance happened between the RSF in yellow and between the SPLM North, now them pushing north became very easy because they're in an area that's bordering Ethiopia and South Sudan. They can bring in everything. And they're bordering some of the most marginalized areas in South Sudan and in Ethiopia as well. These areas in Ethiopia, the Benishangul areas and the Gumuz areas and stuff like that, they're not in the political conversation when it comes to Ethiopia and like the main political forces and the main ethnicities and stuff like that. We'll get into that also. But basically, this is the biggest development. And this is where you get the accusations of Ethiopia supporting the RSF. SAF is trying to cover up for the fact that they've never cared about this region. It's never been a priority for them. It's been one of the most marginalized areas. And naturally, if it's marginalized on a government level, on an economic level, of course, militarily, it's also going to be marginalized. You're not going to have huge forces that are protecting these areas from SAF or looking at it as a strategic region, because it's not only marginalized areas of Sudan, it's marginalized areas of Ethiopia and marginalized areas of South Sudan. So this is what's been happening recently, is that the SPLM North and RSF alliance has been moving north little by little. And there's even talk about them taking Damazin. Why is Damazin going to be a disaster if the RSF and SPLM North take it over? There's the loss of life. There's a displacement. We've already covered like people being displaced from Al-Kurmuk and these areas and in a very difficult situation. But also because the Damazin is on the Blue Nile.
We talked about the Blue Nile.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because if you follow, this is the main artery for the River Nile. 80% of the water that feeds the River Nile that goes into Egypt is coming through the Blue Nile. So it's almost like you have a powder keg that's a geopolitical, landmine, pretty much. If the war goes up into Damazin, and now you have RSF controlling the main tributary to the River Nile, you might see Egyptian intervention. You might see a regional war now break out over
because you're
here.
affecting all these other African countries now.
And it's not only, it's, you know, in reality, like the RSF can't really affect, like, what are they going to do? Like, you know, stop the water, you know, the most they can do is like destroy the Roseris Dam that's over here. It's going to flood areas along the Blue Nile. But Egypt is still safe because they have the Aswan High Dam over here. Whatever happens in Sudan, the dam is still there. Yeah, it can cause chaos in Sudan, but Egypt won't be affected. But Egypt would not want the RSF, SPLM North, these guys to come and control the Damazin, which is, you know, the Blue Nile. And of course you have the Grand Renaissance Dam right here in Ethiopia. So these, the physical changes on the ground as far as SAF or RSF taking over different areas hasn't been as significant as the geopolitical implications of gaining ground in areas that otherwise people wouldn't think about. But the strategic importance of Blue Nile is why you're starting to see this rhetoric of, because Egypt is probably asking SAF, like, how the hell are you not able to control just this little area over here? How are you not able to push back against this area? This is not the vast areas of Darfur and of Kurdufan, where you really need a lot of coordination. You need a lot of air power. You need a lot of ground forces. You need a lot of movement. You need a lot of drones. You need a lot if you want to actually come and take over Darfur again. But they're probably asking them, like, what about Blue Nile? This area is very small. So that's generally kind of...
So there's no much change. But so is there progress on the side of the South, you know, taking over territories? We've seen them. So like you said, they've taken over those two territories, huh?
Yeah.
Which is Diling and?
Delenje and Kadugli.
And so it's still... Okay, I don't want to say it's insignificant, but it's a bit of progress, right?
Depends on
it depends on
what
which
you
side.
what you define as progress.
Yeah. Progress in terms of
I mean,
stuff.
we could say that, but at the same time, look at this. The RSF is controlling Bara. And areas that are still like less than 100 kilometers outside of Khartoum. 2 days ago, the Khartoum airport was hit by a drone. The rhetoric from SAF, the rhetoric from SAF is that these drones came from Ethiopia.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
Why the hell would I come all the way from Ethiopia if I'm out 100 kilometers outside of Khartoum?
Okay, so so now let's talk about the African, because one of the frequently asked questions was other African countries, African leaders. Because, for example, I know Kenya is involved, and Kenyans are not supporting what's going on there. So this is African leaders. They're the ones who are doing this. So some people are saying that, you know, we didn't dive deep into that last time. African leaders going deep and supporting the RSF and actually making the situation worse in Sudan.
Yeah.
I really need to talk about that. And I'll also press you on that Ethiopia thing.
Yeah.
Because I know you're saying that Ethiopia isn't involved, but...
No. It's like passive involvement.
Passive involvement. Oh, passive involvement, right? Okay, so let's start with Kenya, then South Sudan, then Ethiopia. Why is Kenya, my country of all countries, really taking the side of the RSF and making things worse there? So you saw Hemeti's brother has a Kenyan passport. You saw that.
Yeah.
And you saw that there's been reports, I don't know whether it's true or false, that Kenya is in the logistical support of the RSF with the gold and weapons smuggling. Talk about that. Let's focus on Kenya, then we'll go to South Sudan, then we'll go to Ethiopia and these other countries like Chad.
Okay.
Yeah.
So with Kenya, what happened kind of in the beginning of the war, that the international community was kind of scrambling to find a way, with pressure from the UAE, to find some sort of legitimacy for the RSF. The UAE pressured countries, and it's not the UAE alone. Like, we're pretty sure that Israel, along with the UAE, are kind of on the same boat on this.
Oh, okay.
Of supporting the RSF, because you have to remember, at that time, the RSF controlled Khartoum. So it was just a matter of international legitimacy for them, for the UAE, to say, hey, they took over Khartoum and they were part of the government. There's no reason why we shouldn't, recognize them
As the
legitimate de facto army and government
of Sudan.
Kind of the same way what happened in Syria. Now we have this
Al-Qaeda
guy that's now running the country.
Yeah.
They wanted to do kind of the same scenario in Sudan. So there was a scramble to give the RSF legitimacy. I believe that Ruto, the Sudan issue in the war, wasn't really on his radar. But most of the meetings with the RSF, along with their partners and the UAE specifically, I believe at some point the UAE stepped in and told Ruto, hey man, give some space for these guys. And to address Ruto properly, they're like, hey, these guys have a lot of gold and they have a smuggling route that they can go from Darfur down through South Sudan, and then they can export through Mombasa. So for Ruto, I believe that it was a financial incentive to support the RSF. Hopefully Kenyan journalists and researchers will look into things like gold exports from Kenya before the Sudan War and after the Sudan War.
Okay.
Gum Arabic.
Yeah, we talked about it.
The acacia gum. That exports from Kenya before the Sudan War and after the Sudan War.
So this is true now.
What was that?
So that's true. Kenya is involved in the logistical support.
Ruto is involved.
Sorry, not Kenya. Ruto, the president.
Welcoming Hemeti constantly. Hemeti was just here like a week ago.
Wait,
in Kenya.
Wait, come on, wait. How comes we didn't know this? Like, okay, wait, what? Wait, what do you mean he was in Kenya? And what do you mean?
Not only was he in Kenya, but they had meetings of their Tasis government and appointing new leaders and stuff like that here in Kenya.
Oh man, how comes we didn't know? This is insane.
So this is one of the things I certainly believe that all the politicians in Kenya are saving this for the election run. because once, if you're in an election going up against Ruto and you start unpacking everything about how Ruto supported the RSF, I mean, that's one hell of a election campaign.
Oh yeah.
Uganda's playing more of a passive role. They're allowing the RSF to come to Kampala and do conferences and stuff like that. So Kenya and Uganda are not supporting the RSF militarily, but they're giving them room to operate politically. That's the biggest distinction that people have to understand about how these countries are involved with the RSF. The main involvement is political involvement, and there's an economic involvement for both Kenya and Uganda as well. Because also, South Sudan has a security problem where Juba doesn't really control the whole country. There's a lot of armed groups and movements and stuff like that. And the RSF come with money as well. if they're transiting and moving stuff from South Sudan, from Darfur through South Sudan, and then either to Kenya or Uganda and the other way around. Because the areas of control of the RSF are now landlocked, they can't use Port Sudan. No goods can come through from the east. So the only way they have is to trade either through Chad or through Uganda and Kenya, to bring products from Uganda and Kenya and bring back gold, gum arabic, all the resources that are in Sudan.
Now, how is this happening? Sorry, just a bit. How is this happening? And South Sudan lies in the middle of Kenya and Sudan.
South Sudan, for them, when the war started, they were very clear about the fact that they recognize SAF as the official army of the country, and that's the only thing that they recognize.
Okay.
But little by little, the war started affecting the lifeline of South Sudan. Earlier we said Egypt's lifeline is the water in the River Nile.
Yes.
South Sudan's lifeline is the oil and the oil pipelines. South Sudan doesn't have any refineries, but they have huge amounts of oil in South Sudan, especially bordering Sudan.
Mm.
So the pipelines from Sudan, they go through White Nile and they go through from Western Bahr al-Ghazal and Eastern Bahr al-Ghazal and these areas.
Mm-hmm.
These are all unity state. There's all around these areas, there's gold. Oil. But the pipelines are all going through Sudan to Port Sudan.
Okay.
When the war happened, the war was happening in areas where the pipes from South Sudan are taking the oil and going. I think over 90% or something of the income to South Sudan as a nation is coming from the oil.
Mm.
So once you have a war where now your pipelines are being blocked and are potentially being destroyed,
Yeah.
and some of even the oil refineries in Ageli and these areas were previously hit by the RSF, South Sudan now has two options in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
Either they join the war, and in joining the war, are they going to ally with SAF, the army that's actually the reason why they separated into their own country?
Or
Are they going to ally with the RSF, the group that would potentially ethnically cleanse people in South Sudan, just like they ethnically cleanse people in Darfur? Or the third option, which is what they actually did, was to negotiate with both SAF and RSF and say, hey guys, cool it with, the war and bringing the conflict into the pipeline regions. And here's what we'll do. We'll pay transit fees to both SAF and to RSF, just so that the oil can keep going. Because a government where 90% of its income is dependent on these oil pipelines, there's almost no other option but to sit down and to negotiate with both of them and negotiate transit fees and stuff like that just to keep the oil going and to keep the income coming to the government. So South Sudan is caught in a very difficult position when it comes to the Sudan war. So if the RSF are moving over here and stuff like that, they're not going to mobilize militarily to go and fight the RSF because the RSF can easily destroy the pipelines that are taking the oil.
They haven't destroyed them yet.
No. So that's when people talk about involvement and you see a lot of people in Sudan blaming South Sudan. South Sudan is with the RSF. Look at all these RSF recruits that are in the South Sudanese that are in the RSF. That means the South Sudan is standing against us and they're siding with the RSF. Without looking into the nuances and without even caring about what is going on in South Sudan itself before we actually make these accusations. What does the actual breakdown, what is the geopolitical situation between South Sudan and Sudan? With Kenya and Uganda, because there's no physical threat of pipelines or the RSF moving in over here or SAF attacking these countries or anything like that. I mean, part of it is also, Kenya and Uganda being part of the Commonwealth, having all these defense pacts and stuff like that. But another thing is because Ruto probably saw how the European Union, the UAE, even the US, how they're not dealing with the RSF with what they actually are. Like, we expected that right away there would be a designation of the RSF as a terrorist organization. That's exactly what it is. If you're defining terrorism by terrorizing communities and terrorizing civilians and ethnically cleansing and stuff, like, what more do you need to actually prescribe a group as a terrorist organization? When that didn't happen, everybody knew that, hey, wait a minute. The RSF is supported by something bigger. It's not just a rogue army internally. And this goes into the questions of, like, is this an international war? Is it a local war? Is it a proxy war? I've never seen this level of sidestepping from Europeans, from the UAE, from the US. Israel is kind of behind the scenes, not that active in the war itself. But the sidestepping of designating the RSF from 2023 and even before it, kind of signaled to Ruto and Museveni and these guys that, well, hey, if the RSF was part of the government and Hemeti was pretty much the head of state, and now these Muzungus are kind of, dealing with the RSF in a very weird way, hey, why don't we get paid also? Why don't we actually align with them and everything? But that being said, there is a deeper issue of why neighboring countries are not sympathetic with SAF at all when it comes to this war.
I understand why South Sudan is not sympathetic about SAF, but why not the others? Why not Kenya? Why not Uganda? Why not Chad? Why?
I'll let you know, because last time we talked about the internal political history of the Bashir regime, right? Going back to the Nimeri area, the neocons bringing in the Islamists, empowering them and everything. Since that period, and even before it, Khartoum as a government has supported opposition to governments in every single one of these countries. Maybe the exception would be Kenya. If you look at them one by one, Khartoum's relationship with Addis mainly was through the Eritrean liberation movement. They were opposed to whether it was Haile Selassie's rule or whether it was Mengistu. All of these guys were opposed. There is an ethnic element to it. Most of, that was like Amhara rule. And now, Khartoum supported the Tigray and the Tigrinya and the Bani Amir and all of the groups in Eritrea to liberate themselves from Ethiopia. It started off as liberating them from the monarchy. And then when the Islamists took over, it was liberating them from the communist Mengistu. So there was always a faction from Khartoum that's supporting the liberation of the Tigray and the Tigrinya people from rule in Addis. So there's a historical adversarial relationship between Khartoum and between Addis. Now, when you take it from the aspect of the people of Eritrea and the Tigray people and everything, for them to free themselves of a monarchy or a dictatorship was seen as a very just cause to support. But then it started creating a long-term adversarial relationship. But the TPLF, when they were ruling, they were actually friends with the Bashir government, especially in the later years. So there wasn't any issue until we got then to 2019. Bashir was removed. Burhan and these guys came in. And there was a change in Ethiopia itself with Abiy Ahmed coming in. We'll get into that as well. But let's move ahead. Like Bashir supported the Lord's Resistance Army, Joseph Kony.
Yes.
Khartoum supported the Seleka in Central African Republic, who massacred civilians in the Central African Republic. Khartoum was supporting the opposition to overthrow Idris Deby in the 2000s. Even Khartoum helping Asmara, but then turning on Asias Afwerki and supporting his opposition, his Islamist opposition that actually want to attack them. Khartoum tried to assassinate Hosni Mubarak in 1995.
We talked about
also under the Bashir regime. Bashir actually boasted about helping the Qataris among the other countries that were involved in the removal of Gaddafi. The last straw, I think, for the region and their sympathy for SAF as a state, actor, as the main state actor in Sudan, was in 2020. You've seen recently the accusations from SAF that the drones were coming from Ethiopia. And the Ethiopians, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, this is the first time they actually put out a statement. But they actually said that we definitely did not send those drones. But SAF is basically trying to cover up for the fact that they supported the TPLF in their war on Ethiopia in 2020. The relationship between SAF as a central government with all of its neighbors has been an adversarial relationship for a very long time. People like Museveni have been around since the SPLA days, since Yongarang. So he's probably looking at SAF as continuing the same madness that Bashir was doing. Chad are looking, there's something in the Sahel where it's almost like they're troublemakers that are kind of, militias, bandits, stuff like that. There's a suspicion that they were actually pushing these people just like, you're a troublemaker, just go to Sudan and join the RSF. It's a good way for them to get rid of troublemakers in the country and send them to the RSF. The story of Sudan's relationship with its neighbors has been a story of constant chaos.
So what you're basically saying is that SAF has created a lot of enemies in Africa around it.
SAF and kind of driven by the NCP, which is Bashir's
party.
Yes.
But so wait. So now, before we go to Ethiopia, right? Uganda. Let's just go back to Garang. Garang was using a Ugandan plane when it crashed. So, is it true that Museveni killed Garang? And why would he even do that if that's the truth?
There's no way to know if it's true, but the pattern of how things have gone, there's definitely a strong possibility that Museveni wanted South Sudan to, because the reason it's complicated is because Garang was killed because he believed in the unity of Sudan. Garang used to always say that there's not a South Sudanese problem, there's not a Darfuri problem, there's not an Eastern problem. It's a problem of governance in Khartoum. He was saying that the people in the far north are marginalized as well. These are not the wealthy shot callers that are actually running things in the country. He was saying that it's a gang, a criminal entity called the NCP that's running the country and causing all these problems. Not only did he believe in the unity, there was a time in the 90s where Garang was kind of leading a coalition of political parties from all around Sudan. They didn't put him as the leader, but realistically, he was the biggest moving force within that coalition. They went on an armed rebellion to liberate Sudan along with all the parties include the Ummah Party and the communists, like all of them were in one big alliance in the 90s. Militarily, they got as far as Kasara. Because at that time also, Eritrea and Egypt were both supporting this opposition to overthrow Bashir's government. To that level, Garang was believed in a united Sudan and a diverse Sudan that's united and that is sovereign and independent and can be a powerhouse in Africa, the largest country in Africa. So with Museveni, like if you do a chart and do a research to see the level of development in Uganda before 2011 and after 2011, I guarantee you the chart will be rising significantly.
After or before?
After. After 2011. Why? Because you go to Juba and actually, at products, agricultural products, stuff like that are all brought in from Uganda. There's no industrial power within South Sudan. Museveni definitely wanted South Sudan to separate so that it can kind of be his domain.
I see.
Every time Juba is in trouble, the UPDF comes in and pushes back rebellions. And this has happened recently also. And that's why you see them always kind of defending Juba. So that's the relationship between Uganda and South Sudan is a very strong relationship. But it's based on a very imbalanced, unhealthy environment of wars, of counter wars, and then coercing these governments. But, that's kind of, yeah.
I've always known he did it. I just never knew why, but now I know why. Yeah. No, it makes sense. Now look, Kenya, man, what is wrong with us? Like, we always have to be at the wrong side of history. Same thing with Haiti. Now with your country, Sudan. What is wrong with us? Like, literally, like, and you know what? When all is said and done, do you think that the countries that are supporting the RSF or that are making things worse in any way, shape or form, do you think that it might bounce on us badly in the long run?
Well, if Ruto goes ahead forget about Sudan. If Ruto goes ahead with what's going on in West Asia,
we'll talk about that.
That is what will really be chaos for Kenyans, because you will be pushed into a war that the people who are pushing for this chaos and this war are looking at it as an end times war. They're looking at it as a biblical war. When Pete Hegseth is
Defense Secretary.
Yeah. When he has like a Crusaders tattoos. And he's saying, and he fired all of the top generals and brought in ones that are Christian Zionists, evangelicals, to the top of the military. And he's saying telling them that this is God's plan so we can save Israel and all of this stuff. Like, Africans should look at this and say, hey, this is like ISIS, but for white people, basically. The amount of religious extremism that's involved in this war, the attack on Iran, the attack on the Palestinians, all of this stuff is coming from a place of religious extremism. But religious extremism, we're not used to it coming
from the Christian
from
side.
Washington
and
from the Pentagon and stuff. But the Mossad and Israel and what it's doing in the Middle East is also religious extremism that they're taking to the next level.
See, that's what people don't talk about, because whenever we talk about extremism in religion, we always talk about Islam, jihad, but we don't talk about how Christianity also takes part in extremism as well.
And how it pushed now to a place where now the Iranians have closed the Strait of Hormuz. And now it's expanded into a world economic war and a hot war that's going on over there.
Wait, but before
If Kenya goes into the place where it starts, being involved in it, then unfortunately it'll now start to create a conflict that's now regional. And now these conflicts will start converging into one bigger conflict where the lines are going to be drawn as far as economic interests, as far as diplomatic relationships and stuff like that. And Kenya, for the Western countries, is seen as an island of stability in the region. And Ruto capitalized on that 100%. I've never seen an African leader being invited. This is during Biden's era.
Yeah.
I've never seen an African leader being invited to the US and giving this huge ballroom gala celebration.
Welcome.
And all of the previous presidents came in and all of the politicians. And even like Biden was standing here and he put Ruto in the Oval. Like that level, we haven't seen that level of also interpreting it as the West being extremely desperate to have strongholds on the continent after what happened here and after the attitude changes in Ethiopia and after now countries like Botswana and Zambia now stepping up and saying, hey, we want our own resources. So it's stuff like that that just makes it. So we'll get into that into more detail.
Yeah. So now it's sad. It's sad. And I want everybody to just listen to me when I say that I don't support Ruto. Majority of Kenyans don't support Ruto. So, because people are saying Kenya is, no.
That's the problem. Yeah.
It's not Kenya. It's the leadership. It's his government. It's, same thing with Uganda. Same thing with, so now look, so with Ethiopia, right? I need some more convincing, man.
Okay.
Because you say that Ethiopia had nothing to do with the Khartoum airport strike, right? So explain to people why the SAF is accusing Ethiopia and why, let's say it's not the truth. So why is SAF accusing Ethiopia? And how will it benefit SAF if they accuse Ethiopia of working with UAE? Remember, Abiy Ahmed is really close with Mohammed bin Zayed.
Yes.
So I need more convincing on why Ethiopia isn't involved in this.
And basically, these in red are where conflicts are going on in the continent, right? So there's two general areas of concentration of where conflict is happening on the continent. We have, of course, the Sahel region, which we'll get to, but we also have, let's call it Eastern Africa.
Okay.
Right? So we have Sudan, South Sudan, Ethiopia, Somalia, and we have problems, of course, in Congo and everything. And, the blue is like political violence and stuff like that, raids, all of that. But the big conflicts are happening in these regions.
Yes.
Let's go back to kind of understand where this issue of the accusations come from. So like I said earlier, this is the area in Blue Nile that was recently taken over by the RSF and the SPLM North. It's bordering this area in Ethiopia. And basically, what started these accusations was the fact that there's an upward movement of the SPLM North and the RSF into these areas of Kurbuk that are bordering with Ethiopia. So that's how it started. You probably remember a few months ago, there were accusations that there's a training camp for the RSF inside of Ethiopia. Bordering
Yes.
Right?
I remember that.
That was the first accusation.
That was the first one.
Yeah. And then the accusation became what? Became that there is a, what's it called? There's drone strikes, from Ethiopia going into Sudan.
Sudan.
What else have you heard about Ethiopia's support to Sudan? You know, those are pretty much
The
the main.
airport one, the recent one. The
airport attack, the Khartoum airport
the
attack.
Khartoum airport attack.
Yeah.
They said Ethiopia and UAE
Mm-hmm.
are involved in it. Are involved in the bombing of the Khartoum airport.
Yep.
So what do you say about
let's
that?
zoom out over here a little bit. I'll get to that.
Okay.
In a little bit.
Okay.
But this is another map. It's a little bit. It's not really good, but you know. So this area is the area that was just highlighted right now. Okay.
Yes. You said Kurmuk.
Kurmuk.
Okay.
So basically, they're saying that the training camp is somewhere over here.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, there's a refugee camp over here called in an area called Asosa. These areas of southern Blue Nile
Mm-hmm.
have been in the control of the SPLM North for as long as most of us have been alive. Well, I've been alive, but Yabus is kind of the capital of the SPLM North and southern Blue Nile,
Okay.
right? And it's been controlled for a very long time. The people in this area, they have two main markets and refugee camps that they go to.
Mm-hmm.
In this area of Buny in South Sudan, there's the Maban refugee camps in this region that they've already been crossing back and forth. Asosa in Ethiopia is the main market and the main refugee camp where people in southern Blue Nile go to. And this has been for decades. So there's already movement east to west from the communities in this area, as well as SPLM North itself, because of how marginalized and how forgotten these areas are. You don't have border checks. You don't have anything in these areas. There's definitely between Asosa and between Ethiopia and everything, but because it's a refugee camp, there's always been movement in these areas. Once the RSF got into an alliance with the SPLM North, they are using these routes as well. Now, I've talked to eyewitnesses because, I'm not saying, I've talked to people who've actually been there and have been to the Mazin, people who've been to Blue Nile, people who've been to these refugee camps, people who've been to Asosa. Now, they'll tell you, you go to the Asosa, the market and the refugee camp, you'll see RSF soldiers over there.
Okay.
Not wearing uniform,
Uh-huh.
but in civilian clothing.
Uh-huh.
So, but he knows, if, just from the accent and everything, he knows when someone
Okay.
from Western Sudan. So the idea that Ethiopia is going to, create and this is also, of course, the Grand Renaissance Dam is over here. The idea that Ethiopia would jeopardize its biggest development project on the continent in the Grand Renaissance Dam by creating an RSF camp next to it, it doesn't make sense any way you look at it. Why wouldn't they if they wanted to create a training camp for RSF, why wouldn't they create it south of us also, in areas that are not next to the dam? Why would they create a training camp in the first place? There's been recent defections from the RSF to SAF. That's also one of the developments that we haven't talked about recently.
Oh, really?
Is that high-ranking generals from the RSF, two of them, one of them just deflected recently. And they started doing press conferences in Khartoum. They're in SAF uniform now, and they're giving them a press conference. So in the press conference, they were letting it all out. Exactly where does the RSF get its supplies? Where does it actually move around? What airports? Where do they get the training? all of that stuff.
Mhm.
The RSF guys who deflected were saying that our supplies come Chad, Jufra, or Al-Kufra in Libya,
Mhm.
to the UAE, and down to Bosaso in Somaliland. They were asked about the Ethiopia thing. And they were basically saying that they haven't been to Ethiopia. They haven't been doing any operations in Ethiopia or anything.
Mhm.
But they're saying that it might be a recent
A
development.
recent development, yeah.
No recent development would include an army base or a training camp for SAF. A training camp for SAF in Ethiopia makes no sense any way you look at it. Are RSF moving in these areas of southern Blue Nile, between Asosa and between southern Blue Nile in these areas? Of course. Is Ethiopia actively supporting the RSF militarily? That's the main question, right? Okay. In 2023, the RSF controlled Khartoum and went as far as areas of Fao and these areas that are close to the Ethiopian border.
Mhm.
If Ethiopia wanted, and here when I'm talking about Ethiopia, I'm talking about the central government in
Addis.
Ethiopia. If the central government in Addis wanted to support the RSF militarily, in 2023 would have been the perfect time for them to do that. Because imagine if you have RSF taking over Khartoum and these areas and pushing to the east, all Abiy Ahmed would have to do would support forces to go in,
Uh-huh.
help the RSF, and they would control almost the entirety of Sudan.
Okay. But they didn't do that.
And we'll get into why it's an insane idea to think that the central government in Ethiopia wants to support the RSF militarily to take over Sudan and potentially get into a much bigger war that we'll talk about right now. The evidence, when you go through the evidence, whether it's the training camp or the drone strikes from inside of Sudan, from inside of Ethiopia, neither of them make sense from a geopolitical perspective. There's no smoking guns or evidence. It's all, we've seen this shipment come in here and we've seen these equipment come in here and, it's suspected that this, and that. Even the initial reports from Reuters and these places are saying we have no definitive evidence of any of this. Every single report has been speculative reports about this. So then the question becomes, what is the motivation behind this? Some of it, journalistic motivation. Some of it is, quoting anonymous SAF generals. Taking a closer look at these reports and at the evidence that they're putting together makes me ask the question of why. It's not that the evidence is flimsy. There's a lot of speculation, triangulating things that are not related to each other to bring it in. Like, people are saying, okay, there's a lot of flights from the UAE to Ethiopia. Yeah, because the UAE swooped in and helped Abiy Ahmed during the 2020 war. And they've been close allies ever since. Of course, they're going to have a huge volume of trade, of military and security cooperation between them. This is also what puts Abiy Ahmed in a very precarious situation. His relationship with the UAE and how close he is with them, as well as his relationship with Israel, and how they have normalized relationship and how they've been voting in favor of Israel. Doing a memorandum of understanding with Somaliland, talking about we're going to get access to the sea, whether we're not. Abiy Ahmed is a leader who's been driven to kind of insanity. Why? Let's go into the why.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're still on Ethiopia and
We're still in
asking that
Ethiopia.
question of Ethiopia, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is as of 2024.
Mm-hmm.
The conflict map within Ethiopia. A lot of times we forget that since 2020, Ethiopia has been in a perpetual state of warfare, internal warfare. The reason I'm saying Abiy Ahmed has been pushed to the point of insanity
Mm-hmm.
is because in 2020, we have to remember the TPLF was in power since 1991.
Mm-hmm.
They were removed in 2018, and they're the ones who actually brought Abiy Ahmed
Oh, really?
into power. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
But then when he started dismantling the chokehold of the TPLF on the government, on the military, and on the government itself, that's when the TPLF started their rebellion. With this rebellion, it was clear that it was bigger than just a local group rebelling against Addis. The main motivation was coming from a bigger problem where you have Egypt being adversarial towards Addis and wanting to control Ethiopia by any means necessary. At that time, I was in Sudan in 2020.
When the war was hot.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The Tigray thing was hot, yeah? Mm-hmm.
And what we were hearing around town is that there were tons of TPLF high-ranking officials in Khartoum. And then little by little, we started finding out that the TPLF has training camps in eastern Sudan. And all of a sudden, Burhan said, we need to liberate a place called Al-Fashaga, which is a place that's bordering between Ethiopia and Sudan. And it's been border disputed for a couple of decades.
Mm-hmm.
But all of a sudden, he said we have to militarily take over Al-Fashaga. Usually when there's a border dispute, the first step you usually take is dialogue. If you can't get it through dialogue, you bring it to the African Union, you bring it to the UN.
Mm-hmm.
There are international mechanisms for solving border problems. Burhan automatically said that this is a military issue and we're mobilizing, and they actually went to Al-Fashaga.
Okay.
When you put all of these things together, you cannot get away from the fact that Burhan actively supported the TPLF to attack both Ethiopia and Eritrea, which prompted Ethiopia and Eritrea to team up to actually subdue the TPLF in the north. In 2022, there was the Pretoria Agreement, which ended the war between the Ethiopian government and the TPLF. But since then, now imagine this. If you're here in Kenya, a faction of the Kenyan army broke off and rebelled against the government. And they launching an attack from inside of, I don't know, from Tanzania.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
As far as the Kenyan state, then you would automatically put Tanzania in an adversarial enemy position that militarily tried to overthrow the state.
Yeah.
It's not something small. It's huge. The Ethiopian government, they've held on to that since that time. Basically, it's kind of like we supported their Janjaweed. You know, the TPLF are definitely not like the Janjaweed or the RSF,
Mm-hmm.
but it's the same context. SAF every time they try to make an accusation of Ethiopia being involved, is because they're trying to cover up the fact that they helped in the destabilization of Ethiopia.
Okay.
Right now, you have at least 3 big rebel groups that are fighting the central government in Ethiopia. You have the Fano group, which are the Amhara. You have the TPLF, which are the Tigray. And you have rogue Oromo groups as well. So, and now, of course, there's the renewed hostilities with Eritrea. So put yourself in the place of the government in Addis. You have Egypt is hell-bent on destroying you. You have SAF that is going along with Egypt's policy against the central government in Ethiopia. You have Eritrea now, since you did a peace deal with the TPLF and they felt that they were left out of it. And now you're talking all crazy about wanting to take over Assab. So you have access to the sea. Now you have an enemy in Eritrea.
Ethiopia is landlocked. People don't know that, right? A big country, but it's very landlocked.
Yeah.
So wait. Okay, go on.
And you have all of these factions against, even there's people who say like Abiy Ahmed is actually just the mayor of Addis rather than the president of the whole country because of how much armed opposition there is around the country. In a situation like that, in what scenario would a central Ethiopian government say, you know what? We should create more chaos and more destruction by supporting the RSF. Some people might look at this as, well, maybe they're trying to get revenge for what happened in 2020. But the idea that you're a government in a country that actually has potential for huge development and it has actually done a lot of development. For you to have all these armed factions and then decide now, not in 2023, but decide now to start supporting the RSF militarily, that to me does not make sense any way you look at it. Do they even control these areas where the RSF is moving with the SPLM North into Asosa in these areas? Probably not. The ENDF doesn't seem like it controls these areas because you have so many different factions. The other thing is the sensitive topic that people don't talk about, which is the ethnic element to it as well. Abiy Ahmed is seen by a lot of Ethiopians as the Oromo president. Why? Because if you go back hundreds of years, the identity of Ethiopia and the makeup of the state has been Amhara. From the days of Menelik through, way before that, through Haile Selassie and these guys, even Mengistu was from the Amhara.
Okay.
1991 is the first time that, I believe, need to remember when Mengistu was removed. But anyway, since the 90s, the government has been a Tigray government, the TPLF. The TPLF were basically running Ethiopia since 1991 with Meles Zenawi and then the Zalin Haile Mariam. They were running it. Abiy Ahmed is the first time in hundreds of years, maybe ever, since the establishment of Ethiopia as an entity, since the Abyssinian Empire, however far you want to go back, it's the first time that someone from the Oromo
is a leader.
The flare-up that happened, what happens with destabilization? With destabilization, you start with the internal problems. Just like you saw the map with Sudan and how complicated it is with the SPLM North, and then you have the SLA, and then you have the RSF and SAF in different areas. Ethiopia has even a more complicated setup and a more complicated destabilization because they had an ethnic federalism system also. So the actual setup, this Amhara region isn't like tribal, an ethnic map. This is the actual government map where you have the Amhara region, you have the Tigray region, you have the Afar region, you have the Oromia region, you have the Bani Shangul and Gumuz, you have the Ogaden over here, which are Somalis. None of these factions like Abiy Ahmed, and they all want to see him gone, pretty much. But
okay.
as a result, a direct result of this destabilization that happened in 2020, once a war starts and once the bullets start flying and once there's ethnic cleansing and once there's revenge and stuff like that, it's really hard to put that back into the box. Because that's when then you get a perpetual state of warfare. These things are not considered when people say that Ethiopia is supporting the RSF militarily. Then why not in 2023 when actually the RSF was controlling Khartoum and controlling the central parts of Sudan and controlling Darfur and controlling all these areas? So the question, I don't like to get lost too much into the details and the coordinates and looking at, the serial numbers of this drone and everything and looking at that. But what does it actually mean? Because if it means what I think it means, if it's true, I hope I'm right that this is just an exaggeration and a political ploy to put Ethiopia in that position. Because also, of course, I'm 100% sure since 2023, the UAE has probably been pushing Abiy to openly support the RSF and side with the RSF militarily. But Abiy probably knows that that's suicide. Why is it suicide? Because now you have the government in Khartoum, the Egyptian government in Cairo, the Eritrean government in Asmara, the Somali government in Mogadishu. None of them are fond of Abiy Ahmed and his policies and his proximity to the UAE, but more importantly, his proximity to Israel as well. So let's zoom out for a second. I'm Ethiopia. I have 1, 2, 3, 4 hostile countries. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4 hostile groups inside of my country. Do I want to start an all-out war? If that goes forward, then that means that the war will become a regional war in every sense of the way. Regional and ethnic, with different ethnicities being aligned on different lines. And that's where the country that has 120 million people, with the Oromo being the biggest group in the region, it would open a Pandora's box of warfare in the region that would be very difficult to actually, stop or anything. It's going to be a very ugly, large-scale ethnic war, which this kind of destabilization and this kind of limbo of perpetual warfare is perfect for imperial forces that want to come in and look at resources rather than looking at nations and how nations can stabilize. The Oromia region borders where?
Kenya.
Yes.
Oh.
The fact that right now you have like these new military pacts and stuff like that is not a coincidence either. We can always be wrong, and in Sudan, in Arabic, we say Allahu A'lam, means only God knows, and I hope I'm wrong about this. But I do believe that there is a bigger plan to ignite these kind of conflicts and make controlling the whole region easier. When reports like this come out of Reuters and out of Yale and everything, triangulating this kind of content and reports and this flimsy evidence and, triangulating the evidence and all of that stuff. There's a bigger thing at play over here. There's a bigger problem that we have to look at as Africans and start engaging with these issues and start to have to prevent by any means necessary
Regional
the
war.
escalation of this thing and making it into a regional war. And because there is a religious element to it as well.
That blows it out of the water. Once you put religion into something, it's over. It's over. So wait now. So, okay, I have a couple of questions. Huh?
Mhm.
So in 2020, you said that Sudan was helping was aiding the TPLF,
Yes.
right?
At the behest of Egypt.
2020. That was after Bashir. That was
Burhan.
Was that with the civilian? Was that when the army was in collaboration with the civilian government, or that was after the civilian government was overthrown?
This is when the civilian government was there.
Okay.
But SAF and RSF told the civilians very clearly, any issue that has to do with the entire security sector,
Okay.
you have no say in it.
Okay.
In reality, it was a military government.
Okay. Politically.
Politically, because the African Union is in Ethiopia,
Yes.
it's also been kind of an excuse to also support the RSF politically, just as a way to push back against SAF and Egypt. There's other complications as well. None of the Pan-Africanists or anything are actively, excited about Abiy Ahmed or his policies or his government or anything like that. But the idea that Ethiopia's sovereignty is being messed with is a fact.
Okay.
Trump does not like Abiy Ahmed at all. Like
Really?
2 weeks before the war with the TPLF, Trump was talking to Burhan and Hamdok, and he had Netanyahu on the line as well. They were talking mainly about the Abraham Accords. But Trump, out of nowhere, then said, he told Hamdok that he has to talk to Abiy Ahmed. He was saying because the Egyptians are not going to accept the filling of the GERD dam. And he told Hamdok that you have to tell Abiy Ahmed that he has to talk to the Egyptians, because if he goes ahead, the Egyptians are going to attack the GERD dam. I'll send you the link to that.
Please do.
Listen to the video.
So, okay. So,
the question that people ask is, Abiy Ahmed with the West, or is he with Africa, or where does he stand?
where does he stand?
That's the question that people want to know. Are the TPLF and are these guys, are they Pan-Africanists? Are they down with the whole program or anything? The question is no to all of that. Abiy Ahmed plays a very sophisticated political game to stay in power. And he knows that diplomatic relationships depend on trade. And for him, the priority is development. That's why he has a strong relationship with the UAE and with Israel. But in 2025, he signed a defense agreement with Iran. Now, none of this makes sense. If you're looking at it as far as camps and this person against this person, this camp against this camp, that's not how the real world works.
Okay. Because of time, Kenya, Uganda, Somalia. I heard Somalia is helping RSF also. Is that true or false?
The Somali government in Mogadishu is definitely not supporting the RSF.
Okay.
But between Puntland and Somaliland, because they have a lot of relations with the UAE and with Israel, and these are semi-break-off areas. So the Bosaso airport, for example, is used by the UAE. But that's why you've been seeing a lot of chaos in Somalia recently, where the whole issue of Somaliland and being recognized by Israel and all of that stuff is causing chaos within Somalia because it's not just a recognition. It is the UAE using the Bosaso airport and stuff like that. So that's what like the narrative needs to be moved from. Instead of saying Somalis support the RSF, it's very clear that it's a faction in a small area within Somalia itself. Ethiopia should be looked at in the same way. Even though what's mainly the difference is that where Mogadishu's relationships are, mainly with Turkey and Qatar and these countries, but because Abiy Ahmed is close to the UAE, close to Israel, it's easy to set the entire country of Ethiopia as an enemy country.
Okay.
But realistically, what's happening is very minuscule compared to the rhetoric and the narrative that's shaped. It's just like when people say South Sudan is supporting the RSF. You've heard that before.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But when you come to break it down, as we've seen, the story is very different. Once you zoom into the country itself and see, number one, what's physically happening on the ground. How is this RSF support actually translated? What are the internal dynamics within South Sudan? What are the internal dynamics within Ethiopia? And the most important question of all, does it make sense for these central governments to openly support the RSF militarily so that it takes over Sudan? And if they wanted to do that, why didn't they do that when the RSF was at the height of its power in 2023, leading into 2024?
Wow.
So this is the reason why, like, these blanket statements.
So according to you, as we wind up, according to you, which countries are a sure bet, 100% that the governments are fully into it? Of course, Kenya is one of them. Uganda. Which other one is like outrightly supporting the RSF?
Even Kenya and Uganda, as far as military support, I don't believe, other than
logistical.
So there's logistical, and like there were, those, ammunition and stuff like that actually went from Kenya.
Yes.
Over to the RSF.
Yes.
But I do believe these countries have stepped back since then, and they know that this is a losing gamble.
Okay.
Especially after RSF was kicked out of Khartoum, after they've receded back now into Darfur, after it's clear that they don't have any capacity for governance, any capacity for running an actual state, that these countries are like, okay, let's peel it back. And now that's why you see, like, Kenya would host a conference. Uganda would host a conference for them. Some political support, but not actual military support. With Ethiopia, it's also just the political support of being in the AU and allowing the RSF and these guys to come into the AU and, and into Addis and stuff like that. But the actual military support on the ground doesn't make sense once you take a closer look at it. Chad, for example.
Chad.
Chad, you have to look at where they are on the map. Like I said earlier, Bashir supported the opposition to overthrow Idris Deby and everything. And then came his son, Muhammad Deby. As soon as the war started, Mohammed bin Zayed himself flew to N'Djamena and sat down with Muhammad Deby and listen, man, investment, whatever you need. Just turn the other way from this whole RSF thing. The Chadian army never supported the RSF militarily, as far as active military support. But just letting them go through Chad and then go through Libya and move and recruit from Chad as well is just a couple of steps under active military support.
Yeah.
Also because Chad Muhammad Dabbi is trying to keep a very, very delicate balance. He has rebellion in the north. He has rebellion groups in the south. Now, it seems like he's trying to backtrack a little bit on this stuff. But I think when the UAE visited him, the message was like, yes, look the other way and here's some investment and everything. But I think the more underlying message was, if you don't cooperate, RSF, Tabu groups, everybody, if they're supported by the UAE to remove Mohammed Dabbi from power, that would take only a few days. So it's also a method of survival for Mohammed Dabbi. Does he want to get into an open war with the RSF?
With the RSF or not?
Who were originally, like Hemeti was born in Chad.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
So basically, if he said no at that time, he would have been overthrown in very shortly. There's other countries we don't talk about, like the Central African Republic.
Yeah.
And like these areas of the Central African Republic are loaded with minerals. The Russians have been there for a very long time.
Yeah. No, they've replaced
but
the
also,
French.
they like the borders between Sudan and Central African Republic, a lot of gold mining. It's sad because these areas used to be like huge animal wildlife reserves. Now, no animals, gold mining, cyanide and everything in the water and polluting the entire place. So that's another part of the bigger picture that we're not looking at.
Wow.
Like, how is the environment changing around us and contributing to these conflicts themselves,
Wow.
Which is why, kind of looking at these bigger pictures, the map we showed earlier is a map of the conflicts in the region, but also the places that have a drought vulnerability.
Oh, yeah.
We already see the conflicts in Somalia. We see right now in Ethiopia. We haven't paid attention to Central African Republic, but a lot of tributaries to the Lake Chad reducing their water and being desertified. And now you have Boko Haram attacking the Chadian army around Lake Chad. We have, of course, JNIM and everything that's happening in the Sahel. So it's not disconnected from desertification, from lack of water, from the increase in the need for development and resources. It's no coincidence why there's a belt of conflicts that are going on. It goes to what we talked about last time also. The desert region going into the savannah, but the desert expanding south as you go along. Also, if you look at the topographical map, you'll see that this idea of aridness and desertification moving in is also moving into Kenya and moving into these areas. That's why it's always the conflicts that we're experiencing have to be dealt on a regional level. There's no such thing as solving Sudan's problems within Sudan's borders. It has to be solving Sudan's problems along with the Sahel problems and along with the problems in the Horn of Africa.
Pan-Africanism, basically. Pan-Africanism. Whoa. Give your last word, Mosaab, as we wind up. Next time we'll come and cover the other areas, but please give your last word as we wind up. But before you do that, let me give my say, guys, please like, comment, share, subscribe to Sell Africa to Africans, support sovereign media. Mosaab will tell you where you can find him, where you can find his platforms. But thank you so much for watching. Free Sudan. Share this video. The thing about this video is sharing. Share it to to the whole world. Share it to your friends, share it to your mom, share it to your uncle, share it to anybody, so we can spread the clarion call, which is peace in Sudan. Peace in Sudan. Thank you. Mosaab, please give your last word.
Thank you. I want to say, if imperialists look at the region as one Red Sea arena where they either want to control the countries or coerce them, push them towards wars that they're not supposed to be involved in order to extract their resources. We cannot wait for them to play us like this, the entire region. We need to be proactive as Pan-Africanists, and us looking at this as a region and talking to each other in the different countries and seeing how to move away from the perpetual warfare into an era of freedom, justice, and equality, cooperation, and development for everybody.
Yes.
So, a luta continua.
A luta continua. Thank you guys. Thank you.